Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 18 of Dualistic Unity. I am realizing more and more how much I can just let go of thinking that I have to be anything or do anything or help anyone or save anyone even, because it's happening. It comes down to each and every one of us and what we do with the space that we have, and our willingness to just be ourselves makes so many more ripples than we could ever possibly imagine by being anything else.
And that's really the definition of faith, right? It's not having faith in something so much as just not reaching for some sense of control, not reaching for some sense of, I know what will happen and therefore everything will be okay because I'm going to get the end result that is ideal and in my mind, and that's obviously the best thing for me. And there's so much pressure that goes into that. There's so much at stake because, of course, your happiness is dependent on it. And in that state, nothing feels right. Nothing feels complete. Everything is this rat race to go to some fictional location in the future where somehow you're going to be okay if you get there, but you're still the same person you are now. So you may as well just let go and be what you are. And I'm so confident in that, in fact, that these episodes are never pre-planned. We never know what we're going to say. Even right now, we don't know what we're going to say. And so it's always a fun exercise at these retreats to get a little high, suffer through a little bit of insecurity, and recognize that's okay. I can be insecure and carry on, and it will still be okay, because the worst that could happen is that something unexpected takes place, and then I roll with it, and that all comes down to my faith in me.
Amen. Yeah, it really is interesting how often, for so long we think that those feelings we have inside of us, those insecurities, those worries, nerves, whatever, if we can just overcome them, we can just get past them, everything will be just fine, and I'll be good. And there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow in which I never deal with any shit anymore, and that isn't it. It's the experience. It's the flowing of the spectrum back and forth, and understanding that there's no right way to be, there's no right thing to feel, there's no right feeling to have ever. It's always what you're feeling, where you're at, and you can be okay with that. You can be okay with what you're going through, what you are. Then things tend to work out. You tend to align. You tend to slip into that groove, into that flow a lot more easily. It's really, really just comes down to our resistance to how we are, how we're feeling, thinking that things should ever be different than they are. It's funny how often we just try and strive to become something or think that things should be different, and it's just the letting go of that, and the clarity that comes with that is, I don't know, it's pretty powerful to see, and to see it in action too, when there's a group of people, when it's not just me and my experience and seeing the ripples, but I'm around so many people that are doing the same, and the impacts that we have on each other, like being able to see, I can accept where I'm at, I can just be myself. I can just align with things and be with people free in myself. It's powerful, because there's so much of our society and so much of what we go through isn't that. Everyone's trying to be something all the time, and it makes it very, very difficult. Not to say it's definitely not impossible, but more difficult when everyone's trying to be something for everyone else, and we've just gotten so caught in that loop as a society. I think that it's cool to see, especially at weeks like this, where this is possible. I can let go of what I think I should be or should become, just be myself and kind of see what happens. And each and every moment is for itself, and it's just, you are where you're at here and now. We say it over and over, but it really does come down to that, just the willingness to explore what's possible in each and every moment, not needing to become anything or get anywhere. It's just this forever.
And I don't think we recognize how much we are invested in that sense of control until we finally end up in that sense of uncertainty. and there's that urge to reach for a concept, or there's that urge to reach for some kind of a fiction that gives us that sense of false security. And so it's so interesting, and I've said this before, that people who get high, for example, smoke weed or eat mushrooms or anything like that, if they've never done so before, often they'll say, oh, it makes me really think a lot, or it makes me paranoid. And it's like, no, you're actually just slowing down enough to see what's already in there. And you're running from it because you think it's going to affect how you interact with the world. You think it's going to somehow make you less efficient, less likable. And so you double down on this fiction when you really don't need to. You can just let go, feel insecure, and continue on despite that. So that said, we figured that we would record this episode a little differently. Since this is one of the rare times that Andrew and I are actually face-to-face hanging out, we've rolled a bunch of weed. So we're going to smoke that during this episode just to drive home the point that we really don't need to feel secure. We don't need to feel like we are clear and thinking about things from an intellectual perspective. It's enough just to be relaxed, because really, if there's any point to this podcast, it's the recognition that you don't need to be anything. Because we don't need to be anything. And if you're enjoying this, then you have exactly the same capacity to enjoy yourself. If you're enjoying listening to us just fuck around and have fun, then you can enjoy yourself just fucking around and have fun. So we're going to get high, and then we're going to record the rest of this episode. The very first strain that we're smoking is called Tropical Truffle. I'm very excited about this strain. It was grown by a BC micro grower. It is a craft flower. It's a sativa-leaning hybrid. Fantastic smoke, very clean. I've been enjoying it all week long. So we're going to start there, and then we're going to go through a few other strains as we record this episode.
Woo! Fuck yeah.
To the grower of this tropical truffle, I really have to say it's been quite enjoyable. It is a great accessory for not just tripping on its own, but adding to mushrooms as well. It's such a nice, clean burn. And you don't really feel any burnout towards the end. It's really just quite nice. You find yourself being very functional, more relaxed. The thoughts are all in there, but you just don't care as much. So I've really enjoyed this particular strain, and we're going to see how it affects the conversation.
Yeah, I've likewise enjoyed this strain a lot. Honestly, it's kind of felt like mushrooms to me for a bit. It's like there's a sense of clarity with this one that gets kind of trippy, honestly. And it's funny too what you're saying about smoking weed and just letting go and not being concerned about people noticing that you're high or anything, because holy fucking shit, when I was younger, I would get high and it would just be like paranoia, all the insecurities, and there would just be so much resistance. It's funny, similar to going through social anxiety when I was younger. I had all these feelings all the time, kind of what I was referencing to kick things off in this episode of, if I just got rid of the nerves or the worry or the concern, then I'd be okay. Then I'd be able to do all the things that I've always wanted to do. And it was never about that. I still go through the same exact feelings that I did when I was 15, 16 years old. I just face them. I just don't let them stop me anymore. And I think with weed, it's fucking work for me. Like I'm going to practice right now doing this, especially recording an episode. Well, I'm going to get probably pretty fucking high, because it's like it really does bring all your insecurities to the front, and it shows you them. At least for me, the way I see it is like it brings it almost like from the back, the depths of my mind and brain, to right in front of me. And so it's like, here they are. You gonna face them, or are you gonna run from them? And facing them really isn't about necessarily going above and beyond to do anything. It's just to continue on and let go of the concern for them, or how someone's going to perceive you acting. Like, oh, are they noticing that I'm high? Like, oh, am I saying something that makes any sense? It's like, fuck, it doesn't matter. Like, making sense, what does that even mean? It's a two-way street. Like, if you can communicate something that you don't think is that clear, but someone else is willing to pay enough attention to it, they're able to sort it out themselves. And we get so caught, like, and I get caught in doing this too, like, I don't know if this is going to make sense, or like, this might sound kind of crazy. And for me, when someone says that to me, I'm like, let's fucking go. I'm excited to hear this. I'm excited to work through this with you and find out like where this is going, because those are the best types of thoughts. Those are the ones that lead to the conversations and lead to us digging into things a little bit deeper, the willingness to step into a thought or an insight and be like, I don't know if this is going to make any sense, but fuck it. That's kind of it. And I think tools like weed allow you to face those things and work through them, so that then in a sober mentality, they've been worked through, as opposed to coming up and you're like, I don't know where this is coming from. I don't know why I'm feeling this. And like drugs like weed and mushrooms especially allow you to see those things and then face them, work through them, and then they're not coming up so subtly anymore. But yeah, it really is a good practice, just letting go of that concern, for sure.
I like what you said there, that you're not rising above the thoughts. It's really misleading when we talk about getting high, because we really do have that perspective, like we're rising above the insecurities and the doubts and all that, but it's just a lack of prioritizing those insecurities, because all of those insecurities lie outside of the here and now. They all lie in the narrative of what came before or what's going to come after, based on our perception of what came before. So all of that insecurity is based on our idea of ourself. In the present, it's not there, because there's no narrative to reach for. And that in itself is unsettling, because we don't recognize that even just the slightest intention to move forward to some state creates a sense of control. It creates some sense that we know where we're going and what it's going to be when we get there. And the problem is it removes us from where we are. And so getting high is really just relaxing into where you are, which means that you actually see more of what you are. You see more of both sides of the spectrum when you relax. I think that's why we misunderstand what relaxation is. We assume it's the cessation of thoughts rather than the cessation of attachment to those thoughts. They're still there. There's more of them, if anything, when you relax. It's just that your need or your urge to grip onto them fades away, because what you're experiencing becomes more important. And that's what I like about weed and mushrooms, is that the experience you're having takes on the priority that it should have the rest of the time, and that it did have when we were children. We just forgot, because we got so caught up in the narrative of becoming human, of becoming an adult, of becoming something. We forgot we've never changed from what we were. We've always been everything.
Exactly. I need another light. Yeah, there really is that state of allowance, in that. And it's interesting having a conversation with people who don't necessarily recognize that that cessation of effort, or the allowing it to play out and happen, is where the change more easily happens. We get so caught up in the egotistical mentality, thinking that I have to be the one that's doing the change. I have to be the one that's making the things happen. And as you said, we make this assumption that, the direction we're going, the place we want to get to, is what's best for us. And so we get caught in those loops of trying to get somewhere, trying to be something, and getting to that place and just not ever feeling satisfied. So we just keep going through that loop of, trying to get somewhere, getting there or not, judging ourselves along the way, measuring our value as to whether or not we get there. And the whole time we're reinforcing the idea that we're not enough, that we're not already it, that we're not here for the sake of just being here and doing things in that state. And so, in the egotistical mentality, things like weed are like, you're being lazy. You're not doing anything. You're not taking all of this effort to become something. And I need you to do that, because that's what I do. And that helps me to feel better about myself, and, be okay with not being relaxed all the time and having an excuse because of that. But it's really that change is always happening. That's our baseline state, is that change, is those shifts. But we get caught in trying to be someone and get somewhere and become something, that we actually hinder that change from happening. And because we're so set on that, as things arise into our reality, as things that could, pivot us in certain directions, if we were attentive to the moment, if we were understanding that, the change is already happening, the progress is already happening, and letting go of my idea of where I should get actually allows that to happen more quickly, more clearly, with less energy taken, in a sense. Like you're always in flow. You're never not in flow. And it's that concern that you're not that takes you out of it, or at least creates enough resistance that we're actually so powerful that we can hinder that flow to a degree. But as soon as we recognize that we're in it, it doesn't matter how we're feeling, what we're going through. It's like, oh, this is still happening perfectly. And it's that lack of concern that allows it to continue on more smoothly, I guess, the more we're able to let go.
Well, the retreat that we're at right now is actually a really good example of that, because when everybody arrived, there was this hesitation and this concern. It was because everybody had an idea of what was going to happen, or some concern that maybe that idea was wrong. And so it was all just resistance, but it's resistance that's built up over a lifetime of just fear of letting go. And the entire point of this retreat is to just let go. And day after day after day, that is all that's changed in everybody here, is that you've just decided there's nowhere to go. I can just be here and not worry about it. Nobody's judging me because I'm not judging them. And even if they are judging me, I'm not judging them, so it doesn't matter. And you just relax into where you are. And that's the only thing this is about. It's not about learning anything, becoming something. It's about being what you've always been and somehow got caught up in the habit of forgetting and trying to become something else over a lifetime. And isn't it funny? It really just takes a short period of time where you have the space to remember that. It's just that we never get that time because everybody around us is pushing and pulling, lost in that illusion. And so either you can come to a retreat, hang with us, find yourself some space, go for a camping trip by yourself, or recognize that they're all playing that game, that you don't actually have to leave. You don't have to exit and escape. You can just see that they're playing a game and stop believing in it. And you'll have the same space that you have here. But you have to recognize it and put it down. You don't have to play just because everybody else is. It's entirely possible that everybody else got caught up in a game that is unnecessary and rather harmful, but it's been going on for so long that everybody else validates it. And perhaps you're the only one who sees that. Are you willing to stop if it's just you?
Woo! I need another.
Yes, sir.
This keeps going out every time I talk. Yeah, it's interesting every time I get caught, like even last night when we were all sitting in the gazebo, I had my eyes closed for a bit and it kept hitting me like, can I really just let go? Can I really just let go? And it's interesting because it's about you finding out, I guess. People can't even tell you that you can or you can't because it's your experience that you're going through. And so your process of letting go is going to differ from everyone. There's no rush. There's no right way to do it. And I would argue that it's oftentimes better to take your time with it. There is no rush as you recognize things that it's like, oh, there could be some benefits to letting go of that too. It's not to say that you have to right away let go of everything, but I'm interested in finding out about that because I'm starting to feel like I'm getting closer and closer to, letting go. And I guess what it really comes down to is letting go of the story is all. Like letting go isn't about not doing things. It's just about letting go of your concern for what they mean about you. That's really what I'm starting to see more and more, because with the idea of letting go, everyone will come up with something, and the people who are very caught up in their egotistical mindsets, when they hear, "Oh, just let go," they're like, "Oh, lazy. You can't do that. I gotta do something. I gotta do something with my life. I have to become something." But that process of letting go is just really letting go of that concern, letting go of the idea that whatever happens means anything about the reality of what you are. As soon as that idea of you comes up and the idea that it could possibly raise or lower your value, like that's when the things start to bubble up. And how quickly can you let go of that? And I think it is a practice. You go through more and more things that you realize you have to, I'm going to have to let go of this as well. But it's just that practice of letting go each and every moment that those concerns arise. Like I don't have to concern myself with this. I don't know. I don't know what this means, but on top of that, it couldn't possibly mean anything about the reality of what I am, because the value in that reality of what you are does not waver. It doesn't go anywhere. It never changes, no matter what someone says, what someone thinks, what you say, what you think, ever. And it's just coming back to that recognition over and over until it doesn't arise so quickly. But as it does too, don't judge your judgments. Don't be concerned about your concerns. It's when can you arrive in that spot of allowing things to happen and just being willing to let go wherever that comes up.
It's interesting because I can hear the objection from a certain portion of our mentality but how will I know if I'm doing the right thing or the wrong thing? If I just let go, it means I could do anything. So what's to stop me from hurting people? What's to stop me from doing things that are destructive? And we tend to forget those things come from holding on to the idea of yourself. Those things come from trying to be something. They come from a sense of lack. They come from that perception of division. We forget that. We're like, anything could happen. Right, but you're in a different mentality, changing the scope of what might happen. When you're feeling egotistical, when you're identifying, when you feel divided from everyone else, like we've said before, competition makes sense. It makes sense to be afraid. It makes sense to be controlling. It makes sense to take care of yourself first. That is just something that we can't deny. We can't vilify people who are afraid for feeling like they need to be in control. But we can recognize that mentality itself is based on something. It's based on belief in division. It's based on the belief that identity is truth, that my idea of myself is actually what I am. Because if it is, then I'm separate from everything else. And of course I need to protect myself. But once you let that go, everything changes. Letting go changes the emotional spectrum. It changes the world that we live in because it changes the person that we are. And so all of a sudden, we have a full cup. You just want to share because why not? You have nothing to protect. And isn't it interesting that altruism all of a sudden becomes second nature? Because it's not about other people. It's not about being kind. It's not about being compassionate. It's not about being empathetic. It's about being yourself. And in that is empathy. In that is compassion. It's not from a place where you're trying to save people or be there for them. You are there for them because you're there with them, as them. You're not putting a wall up between the two of you. That's a concept of you and me and taking it as truth. You understand it's just a convenient way to communicate. That's all it is. We are communicating very much like synapses, right? We connect, we share ideas, we share concepts, we grow as a result, and then we spread that to everybody else. We continue it on. The ripple continues, and we all grow as a result. But because there's this perception of two people communicating, we forget it's still one organism. It's still one thing communicating with itself. We just have the perception of being separate. And that's beautiful. When you really start to understand what that means, it makes sense to get out of the way. But it doesn't make sense until you understand that, until you give yourself the space to recognize there is a world around you that isn't the world you're thinking about. That is a different world. You don't have to live in that world. It's part of your existence. You have the capacity to make up an entire fiction and live in it. You are that limitless. But you don't have to. You can dip in and out of it. You can use it to learn from and then come back to reality and let it inform your decisions, let it inform your empathy, let it inform your alignment. But to live solely in your head is to miss everything that life is about because you're living in a carbon copy of life. It's like a concept rather than the actual real deal. Because the real deal requires you to let go and be uncertain. Because in that uncertainty, you are expressing your potential.
Well said. Well said. It really does come down to that recognition that you're at the end of the road, but also the beginning of the road in each and every moment. And so understanding that from the perspective of being at the end of the road, that understanding that you're already there, like you're already in. There's nowhere to get. There's nothing to be. There's no creator to meet. This is the end game. here. Like, this is it. Here and now. There's nothing to become ever, and there's no one to change either, other than yourself. Like, we'll get, and it's interesting how, the egotistical idea of ourself comes up in so many different facets, and that concern for other people being different than they are is a way to reinforce it. Like, it really isn't about you saving the world, you changing anyone else. It's aligning with things and being that change. Trying to change the world is from a very, very limited perspective of what you think is right and wrong based on how comfortable or uncomfortable it makes you feel. And it's reinforcing you. It's reinforcing the perspective of division. It's putting another investment in that mentality. So it's interesting how it'll come up even in the most altruistic seeming ways. And that's an aspect of it that we have to let go of as well, is saving anyone. We're not here to save anyone. We're here being ourselves, doing our part, doing all that we can do to help myself. And as that shift happens, as we come back to what we are and being ourselves and not distracting ourselves from that through thinking that anyone else should be different than they are. The ways that we act, the egotistical things we get caught up in, they're products of a mentality. And if you're trying to save the world, you're investing in that mentality as well. And that's what it comes down to, is the investment in the mentality, the concern for the idea of you, the concern for what any of it means about that limited, divided idea. You're not here to save anyone. Just here. The end of the road as reality. So what do you want to do with it?
Yeah, there's no greater evil than that which is done in the name of good. It's so very interesting that in wanting to save the world, you end up becoming the mentality that people need to be saved from. It really is just about recognizing that your need for control comes from fear. And as long as you are afraid, everything that you do is colored by that fear. You cannot help but perceive things through the lens of fear, which means that everything that you see as a solution is distorted. It's not actually a solution that you would normally think of because you're afraid. So you're more desperate for an answer. So you'll reach for almost anything as long as it seems comforting. And this is something that we do constantly. We're always looking for something that just makes us feel better about not knowing what the hell is happening and just existing. And yet there's nothing wrong with not knowing. In knowing that I know nothing, I know more than you do, right? That's all it is. That's all it comes down to, is to recognize there's always more. That's why I love how many people who get into their 40s and their 50s start to recognize, I'm really learning how little I know. Because life opens up at that point. And that's what we develop through in our teenage life. We go through this phase where we want to know everything. We're like, I know. We get to an end point, we're like, I know that. That's what I know. And anytime somebody tries to tell us something, we get defensive or we block it out because now it implies that we don't know. And emotionally, that sucks. But that's exactly what we need to embrace. Not knowing. It doesn't mean anything about you. It's the only reason it sucks is because you think it means something about you. It doesn't. Not knowing is perfectly okay. If anything, it's the place where you learn the most. It's also the place where you're listening to people because you don't know. You don't know them. You don't know what their intentions are. You don't know why they're saying what they're saying. And so you're listening with your full, undivided attention, not just to the words they're saying, but why they're saying them, the tone, their stance, everything, because you're actually there. How many of us have a conversation with somebody and halfway through the conversation start thinking, how do I look? Do they think I'm listening to them? And immediately, you're not. Which is exactly the point. It's kind of like saying, am I present? Well, no, not now. I mean, you are, but you're not experiencing it because you're wondering if you're present. It's always so backwards. It's just about relaxing, entering that place that we call flow state. But what we call flow state is really just what we've always been and we've covered up. That's all it is. It's not flow state like, oh my God, we're attaining some mystical level of awareness. We were in flow state as children before we started doubting and thinking about everything that we did. The only thing was that we had no ability to fend for ourselves. We didn't understand the environment, and our physical environment was still developing, which meant we needed to rely on others. And unfortunately, the world that we grew up in was largely filled with people who didn't understand the responsibility of that. They didn't understand that we are them coming into the world, and that everything that they ever wanted in their life, they have the opportunity to give to us. But they don't see us as them. We don't see ourselves as our children very often. And that's why the idea of the future is slightly less frightening, because we have this psychological end date. It's like, well, I'm going to die before all that shit happens. Right, but not everybody else is, and they're all you. This means something, right? This is why that whole NIMBY, not in my backyard, it's all your backyard and your front yard. It's all you. But until we take responsibility for that, nothing changes. And what's interesting is taking responsibility for that, immediately your ego's like, oh, that sounds hard. That sounds really difficult. It's not. It means being responsible, which means being present and involved with your response to everything, rather than just passing it to habit or passing it to previous reactions or what everybody else has done or what everybody else believes. That is not responsibility. Responsibility is being present, which means relaxing, which is how you get high. You relax, and that's all it's about. Oddly enough, if you want to save the world, just be high. And that doesn't mean do drugs. Though, I will say, if you've forgotten how to be high, how to actually feel every moment with enthusiasm, regardless if you're feeling insecure, regardless if you're confused, regardless if you don't know what's coming, then maybe eat some mushrooms, smoke a joint, try this tropical truffle. It's really quite good.
Oh man, that was beautifully said.
That all said, would you like to switch to another strain?
Sure. Yeah. I'm really high.
This is my favorite episode.
I went through such a crazy dialogue during your last thing of just like what you were saying and like my concern of the thing, and then you would express it, and you were talking about how letting go of what you think is best or what you think you should say. And in my head, I'm like trying to remember a thing that you were saying early on to say, and then I was like, oh shit, he's right. I can't do that. And it was like you were talking to me in my head as I was going through it, and really that concern. It's funny because people get caught in the responsibility component of thinking that they're gonna end in 80 years, and so why focus on being change or making any sort of positive change or anything like that. And it's interesting because those who do recognize that through being present are actually living this life, right? And they get caught in saying that oh, I want to live my life, so I'm not worried about the next couple hundred years because I want to make the most of this. But through living for the idea of themselves that they're caught up in, they're not actually making the most of this. And those who are focusing on 500 years in the future or whatever, the rest of me, are living fully in this experience because they're not so caught up in the idea of themselves. And so I always just find it interesting when people think it's too much. You're taking on too much here. Everyone's caught up in their identity. Everyone's caught up in the idea of themselves. You couldn't, you can't change all that. You can't do that. And there's a recognition through that, through even the thought that it could be possible. When you see that it's just you, see that it's just you, your dream, interacting with yourself, of course you're going to make the most of that.
That was awesome. Hold on.
Thanks.
So a couple of times in this retreat, I've expressed this to a few of our guests, that if you were to be in a dream, let's just say, and sometimes you'll have a dream from one perspective, and other times you'll be somebody else entirely in a totally different experience. And let's just say that in one dream, you are dreaming of another person and you're having a conversation, and in that conversation, whatever it is you're dealing with, you are actually just processing something that you've been working on in your day-to-day life. And the person that you're interacting with in this dream is obviously just a reflection of you, so they're interacting perfectly with you based on what it is you're embodying and processing. But now let's say later on in the dream, you end up dreaming that you're the other person in that conversation. And that person is now dealing with the character that you were playing previously. And once again, perfectly embodying the lessons that you're processing, but now you're processing it from the other side. Both of those characters are interacting with each other simultaneously, but you're experiencing it from two different periods of time, from two different perspectives, despite the fact that they are both the product of your mind and perfectly seamless, so you can process whatever lesson it is that you're processing. That is people. That's reality. We are all that mind. This is all our dream. And we are all looking at each other, not recognizing that we are perfectly symbolizing and perfectly playing the role we need to play so that we can learn this collective lesson, that we are all in this together. That's all the lesson is. And it doesn't require us to memorize anything or be spiritual, but to just relax and feel the connection that's always there. It's always there. We just get in the way. And as soon as we get out of the way, we see it, we feel it, and we can be ourselves. And it doesn't require anybody's encouragement. It doesn't require anybody's permission. It doesn't require us to achieve anything. It's just, oh yeah, here I am. And embracing it, not needing to feel in control, because you're never going to have control over where you're going, but you do have influence over what you get out of it. And that's enough. Once you learn to just embrace that, you have a hell of a lot of influence.
God damn it.
Would you like to open it up for some Q&A?
Yeah.
As we are at a retreat, we are joined by some wonderful, insightful friends. And we're going to open this up for questions, possibly some screaming from the back. It really depends. So if anybody would like to ask a question, I know this isn't Zoom, but please raise your hand. And we would love for you to participate. We'll pass you the mic, and then we will do our best to smoke this weed and answer your question as best we can.
So one of the things I think that quickly comes to mind when you think about, I think of the dream analogy, right? Where you're creating that dream in your head. You're creating this dream here in your head as well. But that's still coming, that thought alone, like the words I just spoke, still came from my brain. So like I'm still wrestling with like I'm still making that up. So is that actually an insight?
So I think the main aspect of that, I mean, one of the components of that is the idea of my brain also, you know, the perspective that this is what you are, you know, that you just end at your skin. But even that is still a conceptual illusion, right? Because the space around you is made up of the same types of things. And so it's the ownership, I think, of the communication of the thoughts, you know, of the thoughts inside of my head, you know, my thoughts, that whole thing. It's like, or what if they were just thoughts? You know, I think a lot of that comes down to just the ownership for the things happening, because, you know, we know that so many things inside of us, you know, our organs are doing so many things outside of our, you know, quote unquote control. But even when the wind blows and your hair moves, is that you moving your hair, recognizing that you're everything that wind is. And so it's that perspective of just the limited idea of you versus the collective you, because anytime the my comes in, it's ownership for something that is reinforced or believed to be the case because of your idea of yourself. That's where the ownership comes in, but it isn't necessarily the reality of it.
And it's interesting because there's always the case that, so I've heard this argument before, that because if I give you a choice to make, you have to do something. I've taken away your free will. But that really is based on the perception of division, right? But everything that we think is ultimately branching off of everything else that we've experienced. Everything that we conceptualize is based on what we know, right? Based on what we've experienced. And so it's all built upon previous things. So all the things that you just asked, for example, is based on all the conversations you've had this week, which was based on all the things that led up to that conversation. But that means my response is based on what you just said to me and the questions there and then everything that came before. So again, that perception of individuality isn't necessarily the case. We really are just thoughts free-flowing together, adapting from one another. It's just that we're very complex thoughts, right? It's not just one idea that's adapting. It's a whole spectrum of them. And that's why we are so complex in terms of personality, in terms of the past, in terms of what we're going to do going forward. It's a really, really intricate being, this whole thing. So much so that it's very difficult to wrap your mind around, especially given how real the perception of individuality is. Because that's the paradox, is that you only know yourself. You only know your awareness. And I'm part of that experience. But to me, the same is true. And so we often go, well, yeah, because you're you and I'm me. No, it's because we're both the same thing. We're both the same awareness, having a different perspective. A friend of mine once described it as us being all individual eyeballs on the same being, with a slightly different perspective, but the same awareness. So if you close one eye, you see things in one way, you close the other eye, right? All of a sudden it's from a different angle entirely. Same mind, different perspective. And we take that and we argue over whose perspective is better and which perspective gives us the most value. It's like, no, I'm a better eye. I can see it from over here. And it's just ridiculous. But again, it's based on that perception of fear. It's based on that perception of division. So it just makes sense, right? So we're just staring at one another going cross-eyed instead of looking at reality and just being what we are. Great question.
Yeah, great answer.
Okay, I'm going to give a quick shout out to this strain, Area 51, which is grown by Pure Sun Farms in British Columbia. Fantastic strain. Definitely a little higher now. And we do have a question.
On this retreat, the atmosphere and the environment and the people are embodying a mentality that makes it really easy to let go because everyone else is doing the same thing. But when you're not in this environment, like after the retreat, you go back to the people you were hanging out with before and being in the same environment before that you were in before, where there's a lot more judgment and a lot more illusion of division being perceived. And so I'm curious on your guys' thoughts on how that process unfolds after a retreat.
That is a great question, Jazz. I appreciate it. I think for me, the thing that's helped most, because I think it's a very common part of this, journey experience, to once you start getting it, people you care about, especially, you see them suffering and you're like, I want to help you. I see certain things that you're clinging to, holding on to, your resistance to whatever, and it's hindering, your experience. You're going through it, and I want to help, basically. And I think that is from a state of empathy, but there's there's an understanding of the actual impact that you're having, and it's so often that people really, don't like being told what to do or how to think. They want to see it coming from themselves, sort of. A lot of people have that resistance to doing what someone else wants them to do or expects them to do or whatever. And so the reality of trying to help people or change people is that it usually just doesn't work super well. So something that's helped me is recognizing that there's not only the perspective of the external connection, but the internal connection and the reality that this is all just your mind experiencing itself. So as you let go of your idea of being divided from them, you recognize that that mind that you're quote unquote changing inside of you is not inside of you. It is changing that collective mind. And so the most helpful thing for me has been recognizing that through letting go of my desire to help anyone, that's letting go of my need to derive value from anything outside of myself. And through that, my mind is changing. And so my mind is changing. And so for interacting with people, whether it's helping them or people that you're just fucking pissed off at, allowing them the space through letting go of your idea that there's any right way for them to be will allow that to happen significantly more easily. And a lot of people aren't going to be willing to do that despite having the space. But for those who are, it'll have more of an impact, I would say, than trying to change them or convince them of anything.
Well said.
Thanks.
I think the biggest part of this experience really is just settling into the feeling of being yourself. Because, and I've said this numerous times, it's so easy to try and use concepts to get to freedom, not recognizing that freedom itself is a concept. And so all you can really do is experience being to greater and greater degrees. And as you do, it's kind of like becoming a better and better compass. It very much is like you can just feel north. And when you start to lose your balance, you can feel it based on how much you felt balance. And so it changes your perspective of everything. All of a sudden it becomes kind of self-governing. But it's important to maintain that. To really be honest with yourself and to recognize the game. Like I said earlier, to recognize that people who do not understand what it's like to be free are always going to try and pull you towards a prison because it validates their experience. You need to feel that pull and recognize, not my circus, not my monkeys. Right? This is why boundaries are good to some degree, as long as they're not boundaries that are set as a result of a hurt. They have to be boundaries that are set as a result of being, of recognizing this is my space. This is the space where I can give everything I've got. And that's it, because then you really are being honest with yourself and everyone else, right? And that's going to take a lot of different forms. It's going to change depending on the person and the situation. Sometimes you're going to be like, no, fuck off. And other times you're going to say, look, I think it's important you recognize this is just not something I'm willing to entertain. And you may burn some bridges, not because you mean to, but because they are protecting themselves from what you represent, which is really that everything they've ever invested in has a fault, and it's optional. And we get so caught up in thinking that this is a requirement to think this way, that the idea that it's optional is threatening. And isn't that scary? So remember, people are more fragile than you might think. And as you start to feel free, you will forget that. You will forget that their prison is brittle because you've let go of yours. So just remember this feeling. Maintain it as often as you can. And when you lose it, don't beat yourself up because you'll get closer to it again when you just let go.
Thank you.
Great question.
Great question.
Would anybody else like to ask a question? Or are we going to the indica?
You are quite the influence. I know, dude. I took one rip and I'm like,
Have a bit more of that one, and and we'll move on to the indica. Everything in moderation, including moderation itself.
I love that one.
I just want to take a moment and say thank you to everyone that is here at this retreat and to everybody in our community as a whole, because I'm very adamant about the fact that I can't teach you anything. I can talk all day long and you're going to get what you want from it based on how much you're willing to look. I know that. I've been through this so often. I understand how many people run away once they get to an insight where they're like, oh, I don't like that. That feels uncertain. That feels kind of isolating. And I've said before, it's like dipping your toe in a pool and just not giving it the chance, right? Having a small experience in letting go and going, that feels really risky, because of course it does. Flight is risk. You have to let go to the fact that you might fall and surrender to that in order to just let the wind carry you. That's all this is about, is just letting go, because you can't fall. You are existence. The only thing you can do is get confused, lose sight of what's important, forget how to feel connected. And there's always a way back from that, here and now. It's just not a path. It's not a journey. It's the journey that confuses us. Otherwise, what's in front of us is obvious. And so I just want to say to everybody who's on that pathless path, just deepening their sensation of being free here and now, thank you. You're the reason that Dualistic Unity is thriving. You're the reason that this community and this discussion continues to grow. And that in itself is an impact. And it can't be for the reason of making an impact, but it can certainly be driven by the recognition that we are always making an impact.
Yeah, well said. Just want to echo some of that it really is incredible to venture out into something like this, especially, in a business sense in this day and age. But with that, we're very much doing our best to embody the mentality as we go of letting go, of not forcing anything, because anytime that force, that desire, that rush, that impatience, thinking that, again, things should at all be different than they are, and trying to, manipulate things into happening based on a certain fucking made up timeline that you created, it only hinders the ability for the reality of that mentality to be reflected. That kind of rhymed a little bit, and so it has to be through a letting go. It has to be through a faith in yourself that it really is just your mind. There's no other minds to change other than your own. You see the reflection of that in society, and we can see it that as more and more of us let go, things change. There are impacts. We see it every time we do a retreat. There's a noticeable connection, a noticeable lack of division, a noticeable flow of things. But it's not commonplace yet. But it really comes down to your experience, doing it for you. This is it, and through that, you're going to get pushback from the existing mentality. You're inevitably going to, but understanding that's just a product of a mentality we've been investing in for a very long time. We want to change that. You got to change the root. It's got to be at the root. And that is very much up to you, how far you want to go, how much you want to let go, how much influence you want to have over the root that is just you and your willingness to be that, to be everything you've ever interacted with, done, experienced. It's all just you. So as you let go of the idea that it isn't, who's to say what's possible? Ray is opening up our third weed strain. Oh, we got a spider on the keyboard.
We have now switched over to an indica strain, GMO Cookies by Spinach. We've had this quite a few times over the last week. It's fantastic. It's very relaxing. If you're looking to have a good nap or get some sleep, this is definitely going to help you do so. You don't have to, of course. It's also a great high in terms of just walking around and enjoying the countryside. Very enjoyable. That all said, and I hesitate to use this example, but slay. And the reason I say that, and everybody immediately cringes, is because that one expression rippled through the teenage world like a cascade from one person to the next. And it caught on because it caught something about a form of expression that was uniquely theirs, something that was their insight. Dualistic unity is, frankly, the best that I can do for my part, just based on everything I am and everything I've learned and the form of expression that I've learned to embody. But it doesn't resonate with everybody, and I don't expect it to. But each and every one of you is a different form of expression. And as you all just let yourself be more of what you are going out and expressing this in a different way that at some point is going to catch someone and ripple. And the only question is, how far does the ripple go? How much does it align with the common mentality and change it just a shade? Because this isn't just flipping over to a mentality where everything is one. Every simple shade of change is an improvement over the division that we are currently enmeshed in. So it's just about being yourself. Automatically the ripple changes. If slay can catch on, your value is immeasurable. Will absolutely catch someone's attention because it is the biggest fear we have growing up, that our value can be measured and must be compared in order to be measured. And immediately we fall into assumption. And that creates the narrative that drives our identity home, and we get lost in it.
Yeah, it's funny. We're so lost in it. And Ray and I were talking the day before the retreat about how invested we are in the idea of ourself, how much of our society is invested in the idea of ourself. It's, where we derive all of our value. So how can you, if you can't convince other people that, they can let go of that they can change and have impact over them in a forced way, how do you get people curious enough about it? And that's when Ray explained that it's like, well, I'm weird as fuck all the time, basically. And that makes people curious enough. And if people have, are willing to chat with me, and are curious as to why, as opposed to just judging or whatever, then leads to a conversation. And so it really, really does just come down to being yourself and not having that concern for what that means to anyone else. Prioritizing yourself in a world that doesn't, as much as we're caught up in selfishness and greed, it's through that lack of selfishness because we're living our lives for so many other people. We buy shit we don't need to impress people we don't even like, that whole thing. And so through letting go of that concern and really just doing it for you, as we've said before, it's that sort of full circle selfishness. As you do things for you, there's a shift in priority. So many of our priorities are externally focused on everyone else. You're just trying to impress yourself through other people, but you just need that as an excuse to impress the reality of what you are, through just being that, through understanding that this is the end game. This is it. This is your experience. If you're doing it for anyone outside of of you is going to take you from the experience, take you away from it. And it's interesting, the shift as we let go of that concern. When we start prioritizing ourselves, we're free. And then we're just talking to people for the sake of talking to them in a state of freedom. And some people are going to be curious about, why are you doing this? Why are you're just chatting for the sake of doing it? You don't need anything out of me? You don't have any expectations of me? Huh. Interesting. I'd like to learn more. A conversation ensues, and that's it. But it's not about force. It's not about changing anyone. It's just about being you. And in a mentality that's caught up in not being themselves, there's going to be some curiosity that arises.
I am curious about the difference between, like you guys are talking about letting go and having more influence and embodying that mentality. And I'm curious about the difference between being someone who is changing themselves to have that sort of influence and being the change.
First of all, I just want to give a shout out to Jazz, who is a member of our community and is often in our groups, knowing that that's a fantastic question. And I think where I'm going to go with the answer, because you kind of answered it yourself, it really is the intention, right? It's that savior complex. Once again, trying to feel important, trying to impose your will on the world rather than understanding you are the world's will, being embodied and surrendering to that, allowing the timing to dictate itself rather than getting in there and going, we need to save this now. Everybody's got to think this way now. Out of fear, because there's so much control in that, and that's exactly the mentality that is sucking us into the deep end of division. And we don't recognize that. I always compare it to one of those finger traps, because you pull and it gets tighter. And that's exactly what we're doing all the time. We don't stop and learn from our mistakes, which is so funny because that's one of the most common things we hear in our society. Learn from your mistakes while I identify with my mistakes. We could learn from that mistake of identifying with the mistake. Stop looking at it as a mistake and look at it as a part of our necessary growth. The perspective where anything we do means anything about us does not have to be invested in. We don't lose any more influence than we've always had. We actually gain awareness of the influence we've always had. It's not that we gain more influence. We've always had influence. We've always been making ripples. It's just that we're not aware of it. We're a bull in a china shop, walking around smashing shit simply because we have no awareness of our size and the fragility of the environment that we're in. That's all it is. And so we gain more awareness and just settling down, looking at ourselves and going, oh, wow, I'm a big fucking bull. And everything around me is based on something that's very, very fragile. No wonder everyone's pissed off. No wonder everyone's defensive. No wonder everyone feels like they need to protect themselves. They're divided in a world that's very easily shaken, which is why we always say, don't believe anything. You'll lose your grounding. You immediately have something to defend. You're up on a chair waiting for it to get kicked out. And it will at some point. So why bother when the very thing you're trying to believe in is the reality that you're experiencing? Isn't it funny how many people will believe in God and miss the experience of God simply because there's an idea we're trying to get to? We just don't understand. And yet we will talk about psychosis, not understanding that we all believe our thoughts are reality because it's very easy to do. They're very believable unless you recognize that they're based on a fiction that you are not. That's it. They reveal a fraction of what you could be from a certain perspective in a spectrum of infinite colors. That's it. Let go. Be what you are. You will become incredibly variable, adaptable, full of potential because you already are. This is the whole point. You already are. It's just that you're so caught up in the perspective of limitation that that's all that you can see and that's all you experience. You don't have to invest in that perception at all.
Yeah, it really a analogy that comes to mind for me in regards to, changing the world, making change versus being the change, is being on, a road or a bumpy dirt path and having this idea of the right way that things should be. Because anytime you get caught up in that mentality, it's always future focused, like moving forward. What's the best thing moving forward? So you're on this path, you're looking like 100 yards down the road, and it's a bumpy road, so you're running through it, but you keep kind of stumbling and moving, and so we think that having that narrow vision, blinders, one track mind, and that being the right way to go, we have to invest in that because we're so caught up in it making me more valuable, and so as we let go of focusing so much down the road and come back to where we're at, we notice the shifts and changes in the road. And what we didn't realize when we were so caught up on that path 100 yards down the line is there's actually an infinite number of paths in front of us, and we don't know which one is best ever. And so in each and every moment we're jumping paths, but as we get caught up in thinking we know what's best, it's like we lock eyes on 100 yards down one path, and as we continue to what would be moving in the flow of things, we get caught on that. There's resistance the entire time. So anytime we get caught up in trying to change things, whether how great our intentions are, how much research we've done, as we get caught in that one path down the road, it's like it hinders us from continuing to flow with things, because there is no one path. In each and every moment, you're just an infinite potential. So you couldn't possibly know. So any idea of that and investing in that, typically because you're trying to drive more value out of yourself, just takes you out of it and makes it harder to do. And so being that change is really letting go of the down the road so you can notice everything and actually be in the flow, which is only ever here and now, the only place we have influence. So it just comes back to that, the reality of the impact, I would say.
Thank you. Well said, guys.
Yeah, I would say a quick shout out to Krishnamurti in terms of just being a light unto yourself, because you are the world. It's not about trying to be a light unto the world. It's about being a light unto yourself. And that reflects in the world that you already are. We are all cells in the body. We all have an impact over how it works. It's just that we forget that and we get really caught up. And that's all. And so being a light unto yourself, again, is really just getting high, which is a great way to think about it. And you don't need to use drugs for that. But again, there's nothing wrong with doing so. But I would encourage people, if you're going to do so, pick something that's not necessarily risky or harmful. Cannabis, super friendly drug. All three of the strains that we've had in this episode have been fantastic in their own unique way. I want to point out, though, that I don't believe there's really been any difference in the type of dialogue that we've had. And it's because, although we feel a bit more high, we're usually incredibly relaxed, which is how we record these episodes. Nothing has really changed except the fact that it's really smoky in here. And so it really just comes down to how much you invest in the illusion that tears you down. It's not about trying to get high. You already are aware of everything. You're just focused on a very, very narrow spectrum. And it makes you feel confined. And you don't recognize that you're holding on to that spectrum because it also makes you feel secure. But you're trying to be secure from the very pain that that spectrum is causing because you feel trapped. You have to let go to experience everything you are, which means you need to be uncertain. Because if you are certain, you have cut yourself off from everything else. Uncertainty doesn't mean confusion if you embrace it. The confusion only lasts as long as you are trying to be in control. Once you're not, everything becomes very clear, but it takes time to adjust into that mentality. It takes time to recognize that feeling free really does change the path on its own. The more you can just feel free, the more you will gravitate towards that freedom. The ego makes less and less sense as a source of value or certainty or anything else. And the change just kind of takes on its own meaning It becomes its own priority rather than a sense of I should do this or I shouldn't do that. You just are change. You always have been. You just try to justify the change that you're doing with thought and the sense of control. But you've always been changing. You can let that change happen faster by just getting out of the way, and you'll find that you are quite literally aware of everything that you're doing. You're just running so fast to avoid that responsibility, and it's not very scary. It's not as bad as it might sound, because it really is just about being yourself. That's your responsibility. It's not an effort. It's a cessation of effort.
What's so interesting to me is that it seems so obvious, right? Yet, if it were so obvious, why is it so hard, right? Like, it's like, to change your mind is relatively easy. You think about something else. To change your mind is seemingly impossible. So it's like, it's like a two-part question in a way, because it's like, what's the root of the actual division? At some point, the environment made it easier because it's right in front of you. And I guess, yeah, that's the question.
I think it's really important to recognize a couple of things, that we go through a very important process of integrating with the world. We really do come into the world with the perspective of unity to such a stark degree that when people leave the room, we panic because it's like they've stopped existing. And so we develop a sense of ourself and our environment. And if that goes well, if we're not traumatized, then that sense of self is reinforced by our parents, it's reinforced by the people around us. We start to develop some sense of how to integrate with reality based on the example of the people around us. And we get a real sense of safety in being able to be like them, which makes sense because we're too small to take care of ourselves. We want to fit in and we want to feel loved. And so we immediately become like those people around us. And then as we get older, we meet more people. And we start to have this tendency to judge people who aren't like those that are familiar to us. And so we have to question that idea of ourselves in order to expand. And so we start to make more friends. We start to let go of our assumptions, things like, it's like, oh, you're new. And it's not immediately a fear, right? But along the way, a lot of people got stuck there rather than continuing to move on. And they formed certain institutions like religion, right? Which is very much all about, we're right, they're wrong. This is the path to God. And so it's immediately divisive. And we're ingrained with that and have been for a very long time in one form or another. And then after that comes nationalism, identifying with your country, right? Identifying with your family. There are so many layers of identity, identifying with your job. All of these things reinforce this idea of division, and everybody around us has learned to practice that because, frankly, we're still developing collectively through that mentality. Just like an individual develops through it through their teenage years and into their 20s, eventually they let go of trying to fit in and be popular and all that. They find a sense of themselves. Collectively, that's what's happening. But just like a teenager going through the process of ego development, it's painful. There's a lot of inner conflict and a lot of confusion because we're entering a mentality we do not understand. It's like a teenager trying to be an adult. And that turns out terribly because they're trying to be the idea of an adult. We have been trying to be the idea of a human forever. And we're just starting to understand that our idea of humanity is not the reality of humanity. And it's a collective process, but it has to be sustained. And we have a common addiction to this sense of control. And like every addiction, we have to come to terms with the fact that we are addicted to something. This is something I often refer to in terms of Occupy Wall Street. There was a collective cry out that something's wrong with the system. That should have been the point. Not, well, what? But that, look, there are this many people saying something significant. And while you're all looking at the surface problems, there is a common root, which is this identity that we've invested in for some sense of certainty and control, because it establishes our value. And so we've just grown up through this, ripple by ripple by ripple. But it is a process. And the reason it terrifies us, the reason that we're so scared moving forward, and you see it especially in those institutions that are so rooted in that mentality going forward, they're like, oh God, everything's gonna go to shit. We need more control. Build bunkers in space, that kind of thing. And it's just because they have no faith in themselves, and so they have no faith in the whole. They don't recognize that this is part of something larger. Very much like an addict doesn't recognize they can change until it becomes obvious they have to. And this is what we're walking towards, is the obvious, as you said, because it really is. But we have lacked the wherewithal to notice how obvious it is, because frankly, people have been killing us when they disagree with us. They've been burning us at the stake, or they've been torturing us, or they've been waging war on us, and this has been going on for so very long that you didn't want to speak up at all. And if you did speak up, you did so from a fucking mountaintop where nobody would find you. And then that ended up deteriorating the point as well, because then you identify as somebody on top of a mountain in a certain sect or a certain philosophy. And so you can see how identity itself is insidious. It very much creeps in as long as we are not aware of how it works, that it is in fact an illusion. And that's what we've lost, because it's so convincing. That's all it is. And so this is the process, which is why I'm so damned excited about all of this. Why I'm excited about all of you, because you're all changing everything, whether you realize it or not.
Woo!
Very, very well said. I think another aspect I think about is as we've, developed, we've become more and more complex. And when we weren't quite so complex, I think there was, a couple identities maybe you could cling to, but it was much closer to the recognition that you weren't what you thought. Like if there's, say, two identities that you could be, and then the third would be recognizing that you weren't what you thought. It's like there's three options, 33% chance, but and this is, we'll see where I go with this, but in our current society, there's so many identities. We identify on so many different levels and so many different facets and forms and whatnot, that now maybe there's, millions of identities. And so it's that 1 in a million recognizing that you're not what you think being an option. And so I think another component to your question is, it seems obvious we've invested in that for so long. And as we've gotten more and more complex, we've gotten further and further from the recognition that we're not divided from our environment. And we've sort of just continued to deep dive into that. And now it's just been something we've gotten so used to. And now it's that whole shift in defining our value based upon it. I think there was probably a while where our identity wasn't so caught in our value. There was the identity, but we've deepened into that to thinking that idea is ever the reality of what we are. And so through that investment over time, it's just, there's been more and more seeming reasons to do so, and continuing to be, more and more suffering with that. But we've gotten into such a complex form that it's one in, millions of recognitions that you could have in regards to what you think you are, because we just continue to build that. It's like we get addicted to building that idea of ourself through our early teenage years, and it's just continuing to add onto that. And so we have the base ones, then we have additional ones, and as we grow up, we have more and more and more and more and more added on top of that, because that mentality of questioning what you think you are is not commonplace necessarily. It's literally the opposite, thinking that more things mean more value for me. And so you keep trying to find what you are. None of them are it, but you keep striving. And because everyone else thinks that they are what they think they are, and that idea of themselves is where they derive their value from, that mentality is reinforced. And there's still that opportunity to recognize it as more and more of me recognizes it, more and more of me recognizes it. And so it's an exciting process, but there's no other mind to change that isn't yours.
It really is just about being. And when that becomes clear, you'll find ways to share that with other people. because it becomes a priority in itself to you. And so you just embody that priority. There's no effort to it. That's the whole point, right? If you're trying to change, you're not embodying the change that you are. So I think this is a good place to wrap up. We have smoked plenty of weed. This is a fantastic gazebo. I've really enjoyed everything about this retreat. I know we still have a few days left, so I'm really looking forward to that. Everybody listening, if you can join us in the Netherlands, we would love to see you. Do join us on Patreon if you would like to keep up to what we're planning and what we're going to be doing moving forward, especially the retreats that follow the Netherlands, because they're very exciting as well. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities to just let go and be with us, because that's really all we're doing. We're not teaching anything. We're just being, and we're hoping that the freedom that we embody and the experience that we're having is interesting enough, at least for you to ask, how are they having that experience? Because although at the moment we are very high on weed, the rest of the time we're just very high, just on being ourselves. And that really is just the cessation of effort. It's relaxation. Being high is synonymous with relaxing. Just relax, let go, have faith. It'll work out.
Well said. Yeah, no, I appreciate everyone being here. That is, as I said earlier, it really takes a lot of guts to be willing to step into this, to step into the face of uncertainty in a world that's clinging for the opposite. And it's incredible to see, all of you taking the leap, even getting here, and being willing to have the conversation and let go. And I've seen just so many shifts and changes and more freedom expressed every single day through each and every one of us. And it's fantastic to see, but it's not to say that it isn't work. You're allowing the things to arise that we've been, suppressing, avoiding, distracting ourselves from for so long. And as those arise and you face them, you work through them, you grow, your perspective shifts, you become more free. And that's just what it's all about, is that continued process of allowing the change that's already happened to do so more and more effectively, efficiently. So thank you to everyone who tuned into this episode. Thank you to everyone at our retreat. It's been a fucking incredible week, and I've loved spending time with all of you very much, and pumped we have a few more days still. But thank you all very much. The work you do does not go unnoticed.
Bye, everyone.